All right, so we're here at I should say chapter 6, actually. Chapter 6 of Martin's book, The Cohortative and the Jussive. All right, in this chapter, we are going to cover cohortative and jussive forms of the verb, pronominal suffixes, and the infinitive form of the verb. You've already kind of covered, chapter 6 is actually a pretty light chapter because we've already covered the volitional mood. If you remember back when we talked about the imperfect, back on page 59. Remember how we did the Moses? Moses will remember the way. May Moses remember the way? The cohortative and the jussive kind of work like that. We're going to look at the differences. Pronominal suffixes are pronouns that are suffixed to the end of words, and the infinitive is a verb that'll take a preposition or a suffix, a pronominal suffix. One that you've already learned is l'amour. Do you remember l'amour? L'amour. We learned that several chapters ago. Page 56. L'amour. It's infinitive construct meaning saying. L'amour meaning saying. Lamed, Aleph, Mem, Resh. That's actually an infinitive construct. We'll learn about that in this chapter. So this chapter is kind of just expanding on things we've already learned about. So it's not really a super difficult chapter. All right, the cohortative. The cohortative is a function of the imperfect verb form. So is the jussive, actually. It expresses the speaker's desire to or intention to act. It is always in the first person singular or first person plural form. A volative, hey, is attached to the end of the word for emphasis in the cohortative mood, but not always. If the verb is the first in the sentence without a conjunction, it will usually be cohortative. So kind of like what we saw back on page, I think I said a moment ago, 59. Yeah, 59. How if you had Yizkor Moshe et Haderek, you would say, may Moses remember the way, versus Moshe Yizkor Haderek. With Moses being fronted, it'll be Moses remember the way. But if you front Zechar or Yizkor on page 59, the second example at the bottom, Moses remember the way. So that changing of the order of the sentence actually will help you determine if this should be translated cohortative in a volitional type of mood, or if it should be just a simple future. Let's look at a couple of examples of the way this will be written. The imperfect over here is eshmor, which is first cal, imperfect, first common plural. Translation would be I keep, I will keep, I will keep. Well, the cohort of this is eshmerah, eshmerah. So what's the difference here? Well, if you look here on that right-hand side, you have the cal imperfect first person plural, first common plural, excuse me. The first common plural on the right side, but you have what is called a volative hey added to it. And in a sentence, this would be in the very first word in the sentence would come before the subject, and there wouldn't be a conjunction on that. Same thing down here. This is the first person plural, first common plural, the one CP. Nishmor, which is we will keep. Core of that is nishmerah, may we keep is the way you translate that. May we keep. Eshmerah, may I keep, right? Something along those lines. Let me keep. Let us keep. Something kind of like that. The jussive, like the cohortative, the jussive expresses the speaker's desire for an action to occur, but the action proceeds from another person. So this is used in the second and third person plural. So the cohortative is only in the first person. The jussive is second and third person. So it's identical to the imperfect in most cases. That's where it can become tricky. Sometimes it's a shortened form of the imperfect. Word order determines if an imperfect is to be translated as a future or a jussive. Jussives usually come first, like cohortatives in the sentence. They may also have a hey suffix, a volitional suffix like the cohortative. So it looks similar, but it's always going to be second and third person, whereas the cohortative is always in the first person, whether that's first person singular, first person plural. Okay. Examples of adjustive would be this. You can find this on your book on page 69. Hamelech Yishmor. Hamelech Yishmor. How would you translate that? The king will keep. The king will keep. Literally, the king he will keep. The king will keep. We go over to the other side of the slide. Adjustive form of this. Yishmor Hamelech. Yishmor Hamelech. So literally, he will keep the king. We know the king is the subject here. So translating this as adjustive, so notice there's no difference in spelling. It's just word order. It's very similar to what we saw back on page 59 at the beginning of chapter 5. There's no change in the spelling. It's the word order. May the king keep rather than the king will keep or he will keep the king. It's going to be may the king keep, okay? HaKohen Yiglah. HaKohen Yiglah. HaKohen Yiglah. The priest will go into exile. Galah is a form meaning to go into exile. So the priest will go into exile. You swap that around. Notice how the adjustive side, we're missing something on that Galah root. We're missing the hey. Why is that? Well, because sometimes adjectives are going to shorten that spelling. It's a common thing to see that. It's a common thing to see it drop a hey or drop a noon or something. Here in this case, Galah, that root is dropping the hey. The problem with that is it makes this really confusing when you look at it because it looks like the root word is Yod, Gamal, Lamed, but it's not. The root is actually Gamal, Lamed, hey, but that hey is dropped off because it's in the adjustive form. So we wouldn't translate that as the priest will go into exile. We'll say, may the priest go into exile. Okay. Negative commands. Negative commands. Okay. The next thing Mark wants to cover is negative commands on page 69 of chapter 6. The imperative, back in chapter 5, is used only for positive commands. So you would never use an imperative by itself for a negative command. The way to negate an imperative is with the negative particles, lo and al. They're both used with the imperfect, the adjussive, and the coercive to express negative commands. The negative particle lo is used to negate nouns, adjectives, and perfect verbs, but al is used with the adjussive. And you can see some examples there on page 69. Lo, 69. Lo, tig, nov, no, lo, tignov, you shall not steal. Lo, tiritzak, lo, tiritzak. I can't pronounce anything tonight. You shall not murder. That's straight out of the Ten Commandments. But see how you're putting the lo there first? Do not steal. You shall not steal. You will not steal. Technically, you could smooth that out. You shall not steal. That's a command. It's preceded by the imperfect. It's an imperfect preceded by the lo. It's expressing a prohibition. Okay. The adjussive preceded by all. And that second set of examples on page 69. Al tifchod ha melech. Al tifchod ha melech. Do not, literally, not you visit the king. Do not visit the king. So it's expressing a warning, a immediate urgent. So the use between lo and al is this. A lo is a prohibition, right? That's why lo is used in the Ten Commandments. Okay. Lo is more of a prohibition. Never, ever, ever. Whereas al is more of like this expressed warning that is given to the reader. It's immediate and it's urgent, but it is not maybe not a forever type of thing. Like you wouldn't say you can never visit a king. It's a immediate warning. Do not visit the king. Or the second example, you do not write to the priest. Okay. Not a commandment style. Commandment's going to use a lo. Basically the thing there, memorize both of those. Know that they're the negative particles and know that they go with the imperfect. That lo goes with perfect verbs and all is used with adjussive. This is the chunk of Martin's book here in, excuse me, Martin's chapter here, chapter 6. It's going to be these pronominal suffixes. We're going to spend quite a few minutes in these. Pronominal suffixes are pronouns. We've already learned some of our pronouns. If you go back to page 54, you can see your independent personal pronouns. Ani, ata, at, hu, he, anoki, atem, atin, him, and hen or henna. So you have your independent personal pronouns in 54. Well, we're going to add some more pronouns to this, our list of pronouns and the way they function, beginning on page 70. So pronominal suffixes are pronouns that are attached to nouns, prepositions, the direct object marker, and verbs. Okay, well, we'll cover that at the end of this chapter. So pronominal suffixes attached to all those different things. They're pretty common in Hebrew. They can be kind of difficult at first. Pronominal suffixes are either possessive, so it's mine, yours, his, her, ours, theirs, or objective, me, you, him, her, us, them. When appearing on nouns, pronominal suffixes are possessive. His book, her wisdom, my Lord. When appearing in prepositions, the direct object marker, verbs, pronominal suffixes are more objective, to them, them. We'll get to see that here in just a moment. So we've already mentioned they can be on nouns, prepositions, direct object marker. Kolo, kol, lo. Have we learned kol yet? On the left side of the screen. Kol is the word for voice. Okay. Kof, vav, holam vav, and lamed. That's the root there. Voice. Well, I'm adding that holam vav to the end of that root and becomes his voice. If you look at the middle of the slide, lo, pronounced the same way, so don't get thrown off from lo, right? What that is, that's the inseparable preposition, the lamed preposition, and the pronominal suffix put together, meaning to him. That's also very common in Hebrew. You'll see li, to me, used several times in Hebrew also. Otho, him. Okay, so that's the direct object marker with the third masculine singular pronominal suffix, meaning him. You don't translate the oath, but you translate that pronominal suffix. Okay. Here's your pronominal suffixes. It looks a little bit different from your book on page 70. It's in a different order. I did this because I didn't want to write it out. It take me a while to do this. So I included this on your left-hand side of the slide. You have your singular pronominal suffixes. On the right-hand side, you have your plural. Okay. That's the way they look. If you notice, the main difference here is your plural has a yod added in. That's your main difference right there. Plural has a yod, and most of the time an E-class vowel, or you have a short A-class vowel too. And then up here on the third masculine singular, you have comments. But this side and what we have in Martin's book, identical. This should be memorized. All right, you should become aware of these. It gets easier as you go along looking at these, but these are very, 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 very common in Hebrew. O, a, ka, ke, e, a, him, hin, kim, kin, nu. It's very common in Hebrew. Okay, and so the way we translate this is his, her, or hers. You can also do this as these first two, these third masculine singulars, it sometimes. I think Martin maybe notes that. No, he does not. So you can do these as it's sometimes. That would be the way we translate something into English as neuter, because Hebrew doesn't have a neutral. Hebrew has masculine venom. English has neutral. So sometimes we want to translate something as it's rather than, so like, for example, in the book of Jonah, the Lord says, go and cry out against Nineveh, for its evil has risen up against me. There in that first chapter. I think that's verse 2. Or maybe 3. Yeah, it's verse 2. Its evil has risen up against me. Well, in the Hebrew, it's actually her uses that third feminine singular suffix. It literally says, her evil has come up before me. What doesn't make sense for us in English to say Nineveh as a her, we're going to use it. So these first two can be used as it. Your, my, him, there, hin, there, Kim, your, you, kin, your, and nu, are. Very, very common in Hebrew. Screenshot this. I move out of the way over here. Screenshot this. Take a picture of that. Memorize that. Memorize that on page 70. Very important to keep up with. I've got another. I can give you guys a copy of a cheat sheet that I have, like that first cheat sheet I gave you. It actually has these pronominal suffixes. It'd be something good to keep in your Hebrew Bible, keep in your book. We can quickly reference that because these can get tricky sometimes, but you need to really review these. Just to make you aware, Martin doesn't have this, but there are alternate forms, pretty similar, a little different. Alternate form of third masculine singular is going to add a hey. The third feminine singular is going to move the comments to underneath it, remove the dagesh. First common singular is going to add a noon. That one's pretty common. You see that quite a bit. Their masculine plural is going to remove the hey, just Their feminine plural is going to remove the hey and just have an. So do be aware of those alternate forms. Not super, super common, but can be tricky sometimes. I believe the cheat sheet I'm going to give you, if you guys show up to next class, I'll have that. Just somebody remind me. It'll have those alternate forms. So when you attach it to a noun, susenu. In fact, if you look on page 70, right-hand column, first one at the bottom, first common plural, susenu, same thing as right there. Translate that as our horse. Okay, our horse. If you look at page 70, wood, plural side, first common, our horses. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you're adding it to a noun. Sere, noon, shurik, over here. Sere, yod, noon, shurik. What's the difference between the plural and the masculine, or and the singular here in this masculine form? What's going to be that yod? So this is a masculine singular noun with a first common singular pronominal suffix. On the right-hand column, masculine masculine singular noun. No, it's a masculine plural noun, actually. Masculine plural noun with a first common singular suffix. Or first common plural suffix, are horses. Masculine plural noun with the first common plural suffix, are horses. Okay. The reason for that yod, if you remember back, second chapter of Martin's book, we talked about masculine and feminine forms in our nouns. Hirik, yod, mame. You can kind of see that residual thing going on here. With a sere, we don't have a hirik. We have a yod. We're losing the mame and adding the new pronominal suffix. It's kind of what's going on there with that masculine plural. Here's a large chart. If you want to take a picture or screenshot or something of that. This is all of your forms that you find in Martin's book. You just have it with singular and plural up here. It makes it a little bit easier to see. If you look, left-hand side are all singular forms. These are all lacking the yod you see over here. That's going to be the way that you tell on a masculine noun if it's singular or plural with the pronominal suffix. That addition of that yod right down there. That's going to be your distinction right there. Now in feminine forms, Torato, his law. Does anybody remember? It's actually up here. I'm going to cheat. You remember Torah is not a masculine noun. Torah is a feminine noun. So feminine nouns are going to Torah, that hey, the third masculine singular, this first one, that hey is going to strengthen to a tav, okay? Strengthen to a tav when you add the pronominal suffix. Over here on this side, torota, you're going to keep that plural looking form because remember our feminine plurals have an oat. You keep the full feminine. It's not going to drop anything off. You keep your full feminine form. Like the masculine drops the main, feminine is not going to do that. It's going to keep the full feminine form. Torot, his laws, her laws, your laws. The exact same ending as the masculines. It's just the words going to look a little bit different. Here's going to show it. With feminine singular nouns ending in comments hey, the hey changes to a tav. It strengthens before the suffix is added. Feminine plural nouns retain the full feminine plural ending, like you see down here at the bottom of the page. Torotaiv and torot, torto, torat, torato, torotaiv, his laws. Majority nouns are going to experience some vowel changes with the addition of suffixes because it's pulling away from the front, right? You're having some properdonic reduction, pulling away from the front by adding stuff to the end of that sentence, the end of that word. Most of these vowel changes are predictable and follow prescribed rules. Dabar becomes debari, devar, debari, devar, devrehin. Aved becomes avato. Bayit becomes bayitka. Matset becomes moto, his death. So you see you have some vowel changes. The root letters still change the same, but you're going to have some reduction because you're adding a suffix and it's pulling away from those stronger, longer vowels at the beginning of the word. So up here at this very first one with the bar, comments is going to get weakened to a schwa. You're going to keep the comments in that second root consonant. And then you have the addition of the heric yod. It almost looks like construct form, but it's not. It's not words of, it's my word. That's another reason it gets confusing. It looks like construct form sometimes. Achiv. It means his brother. I'm just showing you the salai. Mark doesn't necessarily include this, but at the bottom of page 71, he mentions that there's a lot of different things happening in these nouns. Some, the two-letter roots we know, like ach, av, m, some of those are going to take a yod in the plural and in a singular. The only difference here is you have a heric yod in all of these. Whereas over here, you don't have a heric yod. You're going to have a comments, shagol, patak, seri. Here you're going to have always a heric. Something to be aware of, nothing to memorize right there. Pronominal suffixes, Martin mentions these on page 73. Pronominal suffix takes prepositions. So llama preposition by itself means to or toward. With that third masculine singular pronominal suffix, it's to him, to her, to you, to me, to them. You also have the word all, which I don't believe Martin includes. All means on. So on him, on her, on you, on me, on them. That's the way you say that. Some of these look like full-on words, so you're going to have to be aware that lachin, all right, lachin is the llama preposition with that third masculine singular or second feminine plural ending. Same thing over here. Alayikim, on you, right? That looks like a big word, but really it just means on you. So that's something to kind of keep aware. Learning these pronominal suffixes is going to help you recognize all these words. Like lock looks like a shortened form of the verb halak. So, I mean, some of these can be a little bit confusing because they're going to start looking like other things. He also mentions on page 73 that the pronominal suffixes will take the preposition ki and also take the preposition men. Okay, so a key You actually end up changing the spelling. It's not just a kaf with the pronominal suffix. It's kamo hu. You add in a meme and a holem vav in a lot of these. Why? I'm honestly not exactly sure, but that's how it's spelled. So be aware of these also. What I'd probably do if I were you is flip through this chapter a couple times and read through all of these. And if you come to a word that you're absolutely stuck on and it kind of looks like it might be this, go back to this chapter and look it up. I think that would be I think that's some pretty good advice to follow. Over here on the men prepositions, Martin doesn't include this, but men prepositions also add a second name in these first 5 spellings. And on that final first common plural, just be aware of that. That's not a full-on word. Memech. It's from you, right? So it looks like it's something else, but it's really your men preposition with a pronominal suffix. Pronominal suffixes also go on the direct object marker, the et we learned earlier, the thing that you don't translate, okay? They take direct objects. So right up here, Martin has this at the middle of page 72. Oto, ota, oteka, otha, oti, otam. All right. So all of these here are your direct object markers. You simply translate, you don't translate it as his. All right, simply translate it as him. Well, how would this be used in a sentence? It's used like this back here. Betzelem, in, that's your inseparable preposition. Beit, in, tselem means image, in the image. Go back and look at how you can add the preposition here. And why am I saying the image? Why am I not saying in an image? Well, because we're in construct. This here is our construct state. This is a construct noun with an inseparable preposition. It's in construct state. The absolute state is right here, Elohim. Elohim is a proper name in the image of God. Bara. Bara is a cal, perfect, third masculine singular from the root bara, meaning to create. So in the image of God, he created, not his, but oto, him. In the image of God, he created him. So what is this doing? We have in the image, prepositional phrase, of God, in the image of God. That's a prepositional phrase up here. Bara is the verb. What's the subject? The subject is he or God. He what? He created who? We have a direct object marker. We have a pronominal suffix. He created him. Okay, that's how that direct object marker is working. It's telling us who was created. A direct object marks that subject, that suffix. I don't think y'all have this word over here. Eat or et. There's a word. It's very confusing. Very confusing. Looks just like the direct object marker, except it's spelled up here, the second one. Et. The first one's direct object marker. The second one, et. Even sounds similar. Spelled with a sere instead of segol. That is actually a word meaning with. So that also takes the pronominal suffix. So it'd be with him, with her, with you, with me. A little confusing, but y'all will get it. Martin doesn't have im and am. I think we've studied that. Let's look at cal infinitive absolutes. That's where Martin goes next in this chapter, page 74. Cal infinitive absolutes. He has it there on 6.5 on page 74. An infinitive absolute occurs less frequently than any other Hebrew conjugation. So what am I saying? I'm saying this is the least occurring conjugation of all the ones we've learned so far. What have we learned? Well, we learned the perfect, the imperfect, the participle, the imperative, coercive, just of all those. So the infinitive absolute occurs the least, okay? With regard to a function, there's no precise English equivalent to the Hebrew infinitive absolute. We can kind of get there, and I'll show you how in a minute. The form of the cal infinitive absolute is this, kato. Here's a problem. It looks just like our cal passive, doesn't it? Here's how we're going to tell the difference. I don't know if I have an example sentence or not. I do not. Look on page 74, 6.5.1. So Yishmor is he will keep, right? That first example Dr. Martin gives us is he will keep. That's a simple cal imperfect, third masculine singular from the root shamar. Go down to the second one. Shamor Yishmor. Shamor Yishmor. That almost looks like a cal passive, A-O pattern. What's going on here? That's a cal infinitive absolute right next to a cal imperfect, third masculine singular. What's happening? What's happening there is that's the use of the infinitive absolute. What it's going to do is it's going to occur right next to a imperfect or a perfect. And what it's going to give us is a absolutely of that verb. So it's not just he's going to keep, it's he will surely keep. All right. The third example, Zakarti, I remembered. All right. Zakarti, cal perfect, first common singular from the root zakar. Down there at the bottom, Zachor, Zakarti. All right. Two verbs side by side on page 74. That final one there, Martin gives us. Not just literally, it's he remembered. I remembered, right? It's kind of like remembered. It's doubling. What it's saying in Hebrew is, I surely remembered. Okay, it's kind of the way that's translated. It's an absolute. It absolutes that verb. Those verbs we already studied. So if you see two verbs that are spelled the exact same way, side by side, and there's an AO pattern, that is an infinitive absolute. It's honestly really easy to identify these in sentences just because they appear side by side. It's not that I can ever think of is there two different verbs, and one of them's an absolute, and one of them's your perfect or imperfect. It's always, to my knowledge, the same verbal root, like we find in our examples, shamor, yishmor, right? He will surely keep, okay? He will surely keep. When we parse these, you just need to identify the stem and the conjugation. There's no person, there's no gender, there's no number. You just need the stem, the conjugation, the verbal root. So what we'd say is this is cal, infinitive absolute, from the root halak. You've already learned halak. Halok is cal infinitive absolute from the root halak. All right, very simple parsing. Then Martin moves on to the infinitive construct. The regular form of the cal infinitive construct is shemor. Shemor. The infinitive construct is a verbal noun having features in common with both verbs and nouns. The infinitive construct can function much like English infinitives, translated to plus a verb, as in to study, to learn, right? Kind of like lemor that we learned already back in chapter, I believe, 4, means to say or saying. The infinitive construct is not inflected for person, gender, number. There's only one form to memorize. This right here. Ketol or shemor. The basic form of the infinitive construct is identical to the cal imperative, second masculine singular. A little confusing, but I'll show you why it's not in a moment. The imperative occurs primarily in speech and at the beginning of a clause in which it appears. The position of the infinitive construct is variable, but it usually appears as the object of a preposition 91% of the time it's used. The vowel pattern for a cal infinitive construct is consistent for all strong and even all most weak verbs. And you guys don't know what weak verbs is. Well, that's like chapter 9 and 10. They'll take pronominal suffixes. It's the only verb form. Infinitive constructs are the only verb forms that'll take pronominal suffixes. Why does it do that? Because it's in the word. It's an infinitive construct. It's constructing meaning, okay? Katelo, all right, to kill him, all right, killed him, he killed him, something along those lines. This here is the more common use of it. Appears as the object of preposition 91% of the times, with the M separate prepositions 84% of the time. So 91% of the times you see this, it's the object of preposition. Like here, lecto, 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 licto, excuse me, licto. What is that saying? To kill. Okay. Keshamu, keshamo, keshmo, keshmu, keshmo. When or as he hears. Okay. It's a cal infinitive construct from the root shema, meaning to hear, with a kaf preposition and a third masculine singular suffix. See how you have that verbal root right there in the center? And you see how you have a third masculine singular suffix at the end, and you have that preposition beginning. The way you figure this out is 91% of the time that infinitive construct is going to appear with some sort of preposition, whether it's a bait, a lamed, a kaf, some sort of preposition is going to appear on your infinitive constructs. Most often, it's a lamed, okay? A lot of times it's a lamed. I'd say second common is going to be that kaf preposition. Very, 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 very common. The way you're going to see that a lot in Hebrew is lemor, lamed, Sere, Aleph, Mame, Cholam, Resh, Lemor. You've already learned that as a vocab. We don't translate that as to say, although literally it's to say. We translate that as saying. Okay. That's one of the only ones we do that with. The way you negate the infinitive construct, Martin mentions this on page 75 at the bottom. 75 at the bottom, the negation is lability, lability, ketol, in order to not kill. Okay, notice you still have your preposition there because it's also belti, also spelled also. So you got a lot of preposition belti, or it's lebelti, which is to not, literally to not. It's a funky word. Just remember it. It's not negated by low or all. It's by that really weird word that you see there. That's something to kind of memorize. It's going to really throw you off. If you see it in a sentence, you'll probably end up having to look it up, because I still do. I even forgot this was a word before I prepared this today. It's not super, super common. I'd be curious to see how often it actually does appear in the Hebrew Bible. Parsing of the cal infinitive construct is like this. Look at that bottom example. Kishamo, kishmo, kishamo would be a cal infinitive construct. So we don't have to give person, gender, number. We don't have to do third common plural, first common plural, none of that. We just simply say infinitive construct from the root shema, which means to hear. And then we're going to say with a kaf preposition with a third masculine singular suffix. That's how you parse those. You parse it out by identifying that it's an infinitive construct. You identify whatever and what's ever attached to it. So pretty simple. Your homework for this chapter is going to be all the exercises. There's a lot less sentences in this chapter compared to other chapters. There's 6, 10. There's 20 in the whole chapter, right? There's 4 on page 69. There are 10 on page 74 and 6 on page 74 and 75. So it's actually the least amount of sentences Martin's given us up to this point, I think, if I remember right. Do as many of them you can. And the more of the sentences you do, the better you're going to be. If you haven't been doing the sentences up to this point, I suggest you pop your workbook out and start working through them, because the more practice you get, the more exposed you get to the Hebrew text, the better you're going to get. Something I want you to be aware of, page 76 and 77, Martin actually gives us a review of the cal stem. Pretty cool. He gives us cal active participle, passive, perfects, imperfects, imperative, cohortative, absolute, all that stuff on page 77. So if you want to dog ear that page in your book, I would suggest that. That's something you can flip back to easily. That's a good little review of your cow stem. And what's cool, we're done with our cow stem. We're going to look at one more chapter, the Wayakto, and I'll explain that. It's still technically cow, but it's going to pass over everything. And then after this, when we hit chapter 8, we're going to be in the Nifal stem. Review any previous material that you haven't caught up to. Go back and do your exercises, as I said. Try to keep up with your vocab. Something else, if you have the time, go back and review vocab you've already studied. Okay. So you made note cards for it. Would not hurt for once a week. You run through all of your note cards, not just your note cards for that chapter, all of your note cards. That will help you keep your vocab strong. Doing your sentences is going to help you keep your vocab strong, keep your parsing strong, all that. So do your sentences in your exercises in chapter 6. Any exercise you haven't done, go back and do it. And then study your vocabulary on page 76. Let's go over that before we close. Akal means he ate. Yatzah means he went out. That's a pretty common one still in Hebrew today. Yatzah means, they roughly say that now as let's go. Yatzah, he went out. Lakach means he took. It's a violent, as you kidnap, grab, take someone. Actually, in the book of Samuel, when David takes Bathsheba, the Bible says he lachak, he took her. Some scholars, based on the use of lachak in that passage with David and Bathsheba, have argued that it's possible that David took her by force and thus was sexually abusing her against her own will. So lachak, violence. He took, he seized. Adon means Lord. Adonai is what you see several times in the Hebrew Bible. Means the Lord, capital L, lowercase O-R-D. Yahweh is all capital L-O-R-D. But Adonai is the way you'll hear a lot of Jewish people pronounce Yahweh, because they believe the name's too sacred to pronounce, so they'll replace the pronunciation Yahweh with Adonai. That's very common. Lechem means bread. Beth Lechem, house of bread. Bait Lechem, Bethlehem means house of bread. Lechem is bread. Chai means life. It's common if you look there in the definition. Chaya means a living thing. God created every chaya in Genesis 1, every living thing and every beast. Kiseh means throne. Hekal means temple or palace. Nahar is river. All is upon, over, and against. All. Im is with. Hine is behold. It's very common in Hebrew. It'll be the first word in your sentence. Hine, behold. Chadash, new. Trying to think how you say a new year in Hebrew. Anyway, Chadash means new. Chadash means new. So that's your vocab. Study your vocab. Do all of your exercises in chapter 6. And I'll see you guys next Tuesday.